Sarah had always been the adventurous type. From a young age, she had been drawn to the outdoors. Her parents often teased her about her endless curiosity, always exploring the woods behind their house, climbing trees, and finding hidden paths in the local park. As she grew older, Sarah's love for adventure turned into a passion for hiking and photography. It became her way of escaping from the noise of the world, a way to find peace and serenity. Now at 28, Sarah had decided to take her love for adventure to the next level. She was determined to capture the beauty of the desert landscape, the rough beauty of the canyons, and the breathtaking views that only a few people ever got to see up close. She had heard stories of a particular canyon in the southwest that was said to be untouched by tourists, a place where nature had carved its masterpiece. The idea of photographing such a raw, untouched place excited her, so she planned a solo hiking trip to the canyon, hoping to spend a few days immersing herself in its beauty. The day Sarah arrived at the canyon, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows on the rocky terrain. The air was dry, but there was a sense of quiet that felt peaceful and timeless. She set up her gear, adjusting her camera, and carefully began her hike down the rocky path. The canyon stretched ahead, with cliffs rising sharply on either side, their jagged edges softened by the years of wind and weathering. Sarah was careful as she moved forward, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building inside her. This was exactly what she had been searching for, a place where she could lose herself in the vastness of the land. The first few hours of her hike went smoothly. The terrain was challenging, with loose rocks and narrow ledges, but Sarah was used to hiking in difficult conditions. Her boots were sturdy, and her backpack, packed with all the essentials, water, snacks, first aid supplies, and of course her camera, didn't weigh her down. She felt confident as she made her way deeper into the canyon, the sun casting a golden hue over the landscape. As Sarah ventured further into the canyon, the landscape began to change. The towering cliffs on either side of her seemed to grow higher, and the path became steeper and more difficult to navigate. She didn't mind the challenge. In fact, it made her feel alive. The air was thinner here, and she could feel her heart beating faster as she made her way over a series of rocks that led to a narrow ledge. She paused for a moment to take in the view. The canyon stretched out before her like a vast open book, its pages written in layers of rock and sand. But just as she took a deep breath and prepared to continue, disaster struck. As Sarah stepped forward, her foot caught on a loose rock. Before she could regain her balance, her leg slipped into a narrow crevice between two large rocks. She tried to pull herself free, but the jagged rocks were too tight around her leg. Panic gripped her chest as she tugged and twisted, but nothing worked. The pain in her leg was sharp, shooting through her body like an electric current. She gasped, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She tried to steady herself, but the more she struggled, the deeper her leg became trapped. For a moment, Sarah felt completely helpless. She was far from the trailhead, surrounded by towering cliffs and nothing but silence. The canyon was beautiful, but in this moment it felt like a prison. She tried to scream for help, but the only sound was her own voice echoing against the canyon walls. She swallowed hard, trying to calm herself. There was no one out here. It was just her and the rocks. Sarah tried to move again, shifting her body in an attempt to free her leg, but the sharp edges of the rocks dug into her skin, and the pain only grew more intense. She gritted her teeth, refusing to let panic take over completely, but tears of frustration and fear began to fill her eyes. She had been so careful, so confident, and now she was trapped in a place she didn't know, with no way of getting out. She tried to remember the basics of survival she had learned during her training. Stay calm, assess the situation, think clearly. But all she could think about was how far she was from safety, how alone she was in this remote, unforgiving landscape. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the canyon floor. It was getting late, and the thought of spending the night alone here made her stomach twist. She needed help, but how? Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as Sarah struggled to free herself. Her leg was trapped in such a way that every movement only seemed to make it worse. She rested for a moment, trying to catch her breath, and looked around helplessly. The canyon was silent except for the distant sound of a bird calling out somewhere far above. There were no other hikers, no signs of life. The canyon, for all its beauty, felt so empty now. As Sarah's mind raced, she realized she couldn't stay where she was for much longer. The pain in her leg was becoming unbearable, and she was losing strength. Her water bottle was in her backpack, just out of reach, and she felt the first stirrings of panic deep in her chest. She knew she couldn't afford to waste time, but no matter how hard she tried, her leg remained stuck. Minutes turned to hours, and Sarah began to feel the weight of her situation pressing down on her. Her thoughts were clouded by fear, but somewhere beneath the fear, a small voice told her not to give up. She wasn't sure how, but she knew she had to find a way out. Then, just as she was about to call out again, hoping that someone, anyone, might be nearby, she heard something. A sound carried through the canyon, the faint clip-clop of hooves. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Was it someone else out here? She listened closely, and sure enough, the sound grew louder. She strained her ears, hoping it wasn't just her imagination. Then through the rocky landscape, she saw him. A cowboy on horseback riding toward her. Her heart raced with both relief and disbelief. Someone had found her. This wasn't just any person. This was a cowboy alone on horseback, wearing a weathered hat and a dusty jacket. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. In the middle of nowhere, when all hope seemed lost, here was a stranger who might be her salvation. The cowboy's eyes locked onto hers as he pulled his horse to a stop. He could see her struggle, and without hesitation he dismounted, rushing over to her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice steady and calm, but with a clear note of concern. Sarah, her heart still racing, looked up at him, a mixture of relief and exhaustion flooding her. "I'm stuck," she said, her voice shaky. "My leg, it's trapped." Without another word, the cowboy immediately went to work, assessing the situation. He was calm, his every movement sure and purposeful. Sarah watched as he carefully examined the rocks, figuring out the best way to free her. This was just the beginning of a strange, yet life-changing encounter that would change everything for Sarah. Sarah could hardly believe her eyes. The cowboy, who had appeared almost like a mirage in the desolate canyon, moved quickly and efficiently. There was a quiet confidence about him, the kind that comes from years of experience, as he assessed the situation with sharp eyes. His horse, a large chestnut, stood nearby, its reins loosely held in one hand while the cowboy knelt beside Sarah, his weathered hands already reaching to examine her leg. For a moment, Sarah's mind raced, her body still frozen with both relief and anxiety. It was as if the world had shifted in that instant, from her desperate solitude to the sudden presence of this stranger, who seemed to know exactly what he was doing. She had never been more grateful to see anyone in her life. "Hang on," the cowboy said in a calm, low voice, noticing the pain written on Sarah's face. His voice was steady, and it seemed to offer her a small piece of reassurance in the face of her panic. "We'll get you out of here." As he moved closer, Sarah felt a sharp twinge of pain in her leg, and she winced, biting her lip. The position she was in made it difficult to move without aggravating the injury, and the thought of being stuck there much longer sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. "Don't try to move yet," he added gently, placing a firm but careful hand on her shoulder to keep her still. "I'm going to help you, but you have to stay as still as you can." His voice, deep and soothing, calmed her nerves a little. She nodded, trying to suppress her panic, taking slow, steady breaths to calm her racing heart. She had no idea how long she had been stuck in that position, but it felt like hours. The canyon, once a vast open playground of adventure, now felt like a cold, harsh place that had trapped her in its silence. But as she looked up at the cowboy, she found a small flicker of hope. He had a calm presence about him, the kind of person who seemed unflustered even in a crisis. Sarah noticed his strong hands as he carefully started to examine the gap between the rocks, working his way around her leg. His movements were efficient and measured, as if he had done this kind of thing before. His face, though hard and sun-kissed from time spent outdoors, had a gentle expression now, his brows furrowed in concentration as he focused on freeing her. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, trying to break the silence. She was curious and, frankly, needed something to distract herself from the pain that still surged in her leg. "Jake," he replied shortly, his voice still calm but with a trace of exhaustion, as though he had already been through a long day of work. "Jake Matthews." "Thank you for coming," Sarah said, her voice shaky, still in disbelief that someone had found her out there. "I thought I was going to be stuck here forever." Jake gave her a quick, understanding glance but didn't say much. There was no need for pleasantries. He was a man of few words, it seemed, but his actions spoke louder than any conversation could. With his practiced hands, he began to shift the rocks around her leg, using the strength of his body to carefully wedge them apart. Sarah's leg was still trapped, and every move he made seemed to tug at her injury, but he was careful, every motion deliberate. "Just hang tight," Jake said softly, glancing up at her with an almost reassuring smile. "We're gonna get this done." His calmness and steady focus were exactly what Sarah needed in that moment. She felt herself starting to trust him, a feeling she hadn't expected to have so quickly. He wasn't rushing, nor was he panicked like she was. There was no sense of urgency in his movements, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew what needed to be done. Jake's experience in the wild was evident. His strong arms moved with precision as he worked the rocks, trying to free her leg. Sarah noticed that he didn't seem bothered by the heat or the rough terrain. His faded jeans and worn boots were practical, and his cowboy hat shaded his eyes, keeping him focused as he worked. His face was dusted with stubble, but there was something undeniably reassuring about the way he handled the situation. "How did you find me?" Sarah asked, trying to make conversation, not wanting the silence to settle too deeply. "I was just riding through," Jake answered simply, not looking up from his task. "I know this canyon well. I usually come out this way when I need some peace. Saw your tracks in the dust and thought I'd check around." "Well, I'm sure glad you did," Sarah replied, trying to sit up a little to ease the pressure on her trapped leg. The canyon still felt incredibly vast, and she couldn't believe she had gotten herself into such a situation. Her mind wandered to what might have happened if Jake hadn't arrived. She shuddered at the thought. A few moments later, Jake paused and wiped the sweat from his brow. "All right, this is going to hurt a bit," he warned her, his voice steady as ever. Sarah braced herself. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready to do whatever it took to get free. She clenched her jaw, her hands gripping the edges of the rocky ledge as she tried to steady herself. With one strong motion, Jake pulled the rock away just enough to loosen her leg. Sarah cried out as the sharp pain in her leg flared up, but it only lasted for a second before Jake carefully slid the rock from beneath her, allowing her to shift her leg. She took a deep breath as she flexed her ankle, grateful that the pressure had been relieved. Though her leg was sore, at least it was free. She couldn't help but look up at Jake, who was now standing over her, offering his hand to help her to her feet. "Thanks again," Sarah said, her voice full of gratitude. Her leg throbbed painfully, but at least she was free from the rocks that had kept her trapped. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Jake just nodded, offering a small smile. "No need to thank me. It's my job to help out where I can. You're lucky I was out here today." His smile was warm, but there was a quiet humility in his demeanor that Sarah found endearing. She took his hand and stood up, feeling the stiffness in her leg but grateful to be on her feet again. Jake helped her steady herself, guiding her slowly back to where his horse stood. He mounted his horse with ease, then offered her a hand to help her climb onto the saddle behind him. "Let's get you back to my ranch," he said, turning the horse to face the rocky path. "It's not far from here. You'll be all right there until we get you patched up." Sarah was still in a daze. The whole experience felt surreal, like something out of a dream. She had gone from being trapped in the canyon, feeling completely alone, to being rescued by this cowboy who now guided her toward safety. As they rode, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over her. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and she didn't know what would happen next, but for now she was safe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax and trust that someone was looking out for her. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the canyon, Sarah felt a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. Maybe this was just the beginning of something new, something unexpected. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for sure. Her life had just taken a turn, and it was about to change forever. Sarah woke up to the soft sound of birds chirping outside, their songs filling the quiet morning air. The first thing she noticed was the gentle warmth on her skin, the sunlight streaming through a small window in the room where she now lay. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she was at peace. She let out a slow breath, taking in the stillness around her, and then her mind began to replay everything that had happened. The canyon, her fall, the cowboy who had rescued her. Jake. His face, calm and reassuring, filled her thoughts. How had she gone from being trapped in a lonely, desolate canyon to being here, in a cozy room on a ranch she hadn't even known existed? As she moved to sit up, she winced. The pain in her leg was still there, a dull ache that reminded her of what she had just gone through, but it wasn't as sharp as it had been. The tightness of her leg had lessened, and there was a sense of relief in knowing that she wasn't stuck in the canyon anymore. She reached down to feel the bandages Jake had carefully placed on her leg the night before. They were still secure, though she could feel that the swelling had gone down. Sarah slowly pushed herself up from the bed, careful not to overexert herself. She stood and hobbled toward the small window. Outside, the ranch stretched out before her like a peaceful haven. There were wide-open fields, patches of green grass, and in the distance she could see a barn with horses grazing nearby. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the landscape. It was a far cry from the canyon's harsh, unforgiving terrain, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. As she turned away from the window, she was startled to see Jake standing in the doorway. His cowboy hat was perched atop his head, and his weathered boots clicked softly on the wooden floor as he stepped inside. His expression was as calm and steady as always, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made Sarah feel a sense of gratitude wash over her once again. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked, his voice low and easy. "I'm okay," Sarah replied, her voice still a little shaky from the events of the past day. "Better than I expected, honestly. My leg hurts, but it's not as bad as it was. It's just strange, you know? I thought I'd be stuck in that canyon forever." Jake gave her a small smile. "I'm glad you're feeling better. You've got a long road ahead, but you're tough. You'll heal fast." His confidence in her was somehow comforting. It made Sarah feel like maybe she could handle this after all. She looked up at him, taking in his calm demeanor once again. "Thank you for helping me," she said quietly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Jake just nodded, his expression softening. "I was glad to help," he said, his voice carrying a sense of sincerity. "But you've got to take it easy now. The canyon's not going anywhere, and neither are we. You need to rest for a bit." Sarah nodded, still unsure of what to do with herself. She had always been independent, used to doing things on her own. Being stuck in one place, depending on someone else, was difficult for her. But she couldn't ignore the fact that Jake had saved her. Without him, she might have spent days or worse weeks alone in the canyon. "All right," she said after a moment of silence. "I'll rest, but I'm not the type to just sit around all day." Jake chuckled, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I didn't think you would. But for now, just take it easy. I've got some work to do around here, and I'll need to get you set up with some crutches. I'll be back to check on you in a bit, all right?" Sarah nodded, grateful for his understanding. As Jake left the room, she sat back down on the bed, her mind wandering. It was strange to be here on this ranch, in the company of a man she had just met, but something about this place felt different from the life she had known. It wasn't just the peace of the ranch. It was the sense of simplicity. The way things seemed slower here, more grounded. No hustle, no rush, just life as it was in its most natural state. She couldn't help but compare it to her old life in the city. Back home, everything was always moving fast. Deadlines, meetings, and crowded streets. It had been years since she had truly felt the quiet of nature, the stillness that came with it. She had become so used to the noise of the world, the constant need to be productive, that she had forgotten what it was like to just be. Later that day, Jake returned to check on her. He brought with him a pair of crutches as promised and helped her get to the porch. She was still moving slowly, the pain in her leg reminding her of the struggle she had gone through, but with Jake's help, she managed to get outside. The fresh air felt good against her skin, and she took a deep breath, letting the scent of the earth fill her lungs. "You doing okay?" Jake asked as he helped her settle into a chair on the porch. "I'm fine," Sarah said, grateful for the chance to get outside. "Just trying to adjust." Jake leaned against the wooden railing, looking out over the land. "You'll get used to it," he said simply. "It takes time, but this place has a way of growing on you." They both sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch. The horses were grazing peacefully in the distance, and Sarah could hear the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The quiet was soothing, a contrast to the noise of the city she had left behind. "Tell me about the ranch," Sarah said after a moment, breaking the silence. "How did you end up here?" Jake turned to look at her, his eyes thoughtful. "It's been in my family for generations," he explained. "My grandfather started it, and my dad ran it before me. It's not an easy life, but it's one I know well. I've always felt at home here, even when things get tough." Sarah could hear the pride in his voice as he spoke about the land, the history of the ranch, and the work that came with it. There was a deep connection there, a bond that was hard to explain but easy to see in the way he carried himself. It was clear that Jake didn't just work the land. He loved it. "I think I understand," Sarah said quietly, her gaze turning to the open fields in front of her. "There's something peaceful about it." "Something real?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, that's the way I see it. Out here you learn to respect the land, to be patient. It teaches you a lot about life." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the afternoon sun beginning to lower in the sky. Sarah could feel herself relaxing for the first time in a long time, the tension in her body easing. Jake didn't pressure her to talk more than she was ready for, and that felt comforting. The days that followed were quiet, slow, and full of little moments that changed Sarah's perspective. She spent time resting and recovering, but she also began to learn more about Jake and the ranch. He was patient with her, showing her the ropes of life on the land, even if her leg wasn't fully healed. She realized that as much as she had been focused on capturing the beauty of the world through her camera lens, there was a different kind of beauty to be found here, the beauty of simplicity, of taking things one step at a time. In the days that passed, Sarah began to feel a connection to this place, to Jake, and to a part of herself she had forgotten. It was a part of her that had longed for quiet, for peace, for a life that didn't always feel like a race. And somewhere deep inside, Sarah began to wonder if this unexpected turn of events might be the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that would change everything. As the days passed, Sarah found herself settling into a new rhythm. Her leg was healing, slowly but surely, and Jake was there every step of the way to help her. The pain was still there at times, but she was learning to manage it. What surprised her most was how quickly she had adapted to life on the ranch. She had come here with no plans to stay longer than necessary, but now something about the place kept her rooted. The mornings were peaceful. Sarah would wake up to the smell of fresh coffee brewing, the soft sound of the wind outside, and the gentle chirping of birds. She had never appreciated the quiet so much before. The city had always been so loud, filled with noise, people, and endless activity. But here, in the heart of the ranch, she had come to love the stillness. Jake, of course, had his daily routine. He worked with the animals, tended to the crops, and maintained the land. At first, Sarah had stayed inside most of the time, not wanting to overdo it with her injured leg, but slowly she began to join him. She wasn't able to do much, but she was eager to learn. Jake had shown her how to care for the horses, feed the chickens, and even how to tell the different types of plants that grew around the ranch. Each day she found herself becoming more involved, more connected to the life she was beginning to build here. She began to notice the little things about Jake that made him different from anyone she had ever met before. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were always thoughtful. He had a way of looking at the world with a quiet wisdom, as though he saw things other people missed. His calm demeanor had a way of making her feel safe, at ease. In the mornings, he would teach her how to saddle a horse or repair a fence, always patient, always willing to explain things in detail. Their conversations, though few, were meaningful. He didn't rush through them the way people did in the city. Here, time seemed to slow down. When Jake spoke, it felt like he wasn't just talking. He was sharing pieces of himself. He talked about his family, the history of the ranch, and how it had been passed down through generations. He shared stories about the land, about his childhood, and about the lessons he had learned from the quiet life he led. Sarah found herself drawn to these stories, to the way he made even the simplest moments seem important. One afternoon, as they worked together to fix a broken fence, Sarah couldn't help but ask, "Jake, why do you live out here? I mean, I know you said the ranch has been in your family for a long time, but what made you stay?" Jake paused for a moment, his hands resting on the fence post he had been repairing. He looked out at the open fields as though the answer was somewhere out there in the vast landscape. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "It's hard to explain," he began, his voice soft. "I guess it's just the way this place feels. There's a peace here that I can't find anywhere else. My family, they all felt the same. We were never rich or famous, but we had this land and it was ours. I guess I stayed because I never found a reason to leave. Out here, you learn to work hard, to take care of the land, and to appreciate the quiet moments. That's something that doesn't come easy in the city." Sarah listened intently, trying to understand his perspective. She had spent most of her life chasing ambition, moving from one project to the next, always striving for more. She had always believed that success was measured by what you could achieve, by how much you could accomplish. But Jake's words made her realize something important. Maybe success wasn't about achieving more. It was about finding peace, finding meaning in the simple things. As the days went on, Sarah and Jake began to spend more time together. She helped him with the animals, and he helped her with her photography. He didn't know much about photography, but he was always willing to help her set up her equipment, move her gear, or take her to the best spots around the ranch to capture the perfect shot. Sarah couldn't help but notice how natural he looked in front of the camera, his rugged features and steady presence making every photo seem more alive. There was something about being with Jake that made her feel different, like she was finally able to let go of the pressure and expectations she had always carried with her. With him, she didn't have to be someone else. She could just be Sarah. There was no rush, no deadlines. The days passed slowly, and with each one, Sarah felt like she was finding a part of herself that had been missing for a long time. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Sarah sat on the porch watching Jake work. He was mending a fence, his movements deliberate and sure as he had done countless times before. She couldn't help but admire him. There was something incredibly steady about him, something that grounded her in a way she hadn't expected. As she watched him, she found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't been with anyone before. Jake seemed to sense her gaze, and without turning around, he spoke. "You know, you're getting good with that camera." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her at his compliment. "Thanks, I've been working on it." "You've got a good eye," Jake said, his voice almost teasing. "I've seen you catch some beautiful shots out there." The simplicity of the compliment made her heart flutter in a way she wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just that he appreciated her photography. It was the way he noticed the little things about her, the way he saw her in a way no one else had. Sarah realized that in his quiet way, Jake had become someone important to her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they shared a moment of silence, both of them looking out over the land. The sky was a canvas of colors, and the ranch seemed to glow with a warm golden light. There was a sense of tranquility in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt completely at peace. "I think I'm starting to understand what you mean," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "about the peace here. It's different than anything I've known." Jake turned to look at her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her as if weighing his words carefully. Finally he spoke, his voice low and sincere. "I'm glad you're here, Sarah." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them standing there together, in the quiet of the ranch, with the world feeling a little smaller, a little simpler. In that moment, Sarah realized something that had been growing inside her since the day she arrived. This place, this land and Jake had changed her. She had come here to escape, to find something more in her life, but what she hadn't expected was to find herself.
And maybe, just maybe, this was where she was meant to be.
With him, the bond between Sarah and Jake was growing stronger with each passing day, woven together through shared moments, quiet conversations, and the understanding that somehow they had both found something in each other that they had been searching for all along. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's leg continued to heal, but it was more than just her body that was changing. She had arrived at Jake's ranch a stranger to the land, a woman used to the fast-paced life of the city, with dreams of escaping for just a little while. But now Sarah was beginning to feel a deep connection to the place she had never expected. The quiet mornings, the peaceful afternoons spent helping Jake with the animals, and the long evenings where they sat together watching the sunset, all of it had become a part of her. It was strange, but Sarah had started to feel like she belonged here. There was no rushing, no deadlines, no constant pressure to perform. Here, time moved differently, slowly, like a quiet river flowing gently through the landscape. And then, one afternoon, Sarah found herself standing by the porch, watching Jake work. She noticed how his hands moved with ease as he repaired the broken fence. The steady rhythm of his work, the quiet focus with which he approached everything, had a way of drawing her in. Over the weeks, their bond had deepened. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but there was a growing sense of comfort between them, a trust that had developed without either of them forcing it. Sarah had spent so much of her life trying to prove herself in the busy world she had come from. She had built a career based on achievements and recognition, but the more she was here with Jake, the more she questioned whether that was the kind of life she wanted anymore. She had learned to find satisfaction in smaller, simpler moments, waking up to the quiet sounds of nature, caring for the animals, feeling the sun on her face as she took in the beauty of the land. This was a life she had never known, a life she wasn't sure she was ready to leave. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, the sky painted with vibrant shades of orange and pink, Sarah couldn't keep her thoughts to herself any longer. The quiet moment between them felt like the right time. She had to speak her truth. "Jake," she began, her voice a little shaky but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About the life I had before, and the life I have here, and I'm not sure what to do." Jake turned toward her, his expression calm but attentive. "You don't have to decide anything right now, Sarah," he said gently. "Take your time. This place, it's not going anywhere." But Sarah felt the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her. "I came here to get away," she continued, her words coming faster now as if they had been building inside her for so long. "But it's more than just getting away. It's about finding something real, something that feels like home. And I've been thinking about the life I've been living in the city, the constant hustle, and I'm just not sure if that's what I want anymore." Jake looked at her with understanding in his eyes, but there was something else there too, a quiet hope, as though he had sensed her struggle all along. He set down the tools he had been holding and stepped closer to her, his movement slow and deliberate. "You don't have to rush into anything, Sarah. Whatever decision you make, it's yours, but if you want to stay here, you're welcome to. There's no pressure." Sarah's heart swelled at his words, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready to make that choice," she admitted. "But being here, with you, it feels different. I feel like I'm actually seeing the world for the first time." Jake smiled, a soft, almost shy smile that made Sarah's heart flutter. "Sometimes it takes stepping away from everything to truly see what matters," he said quietly. "I think you're already starting to see it." The conversation hung in the air between them, and for a few moments, there was nothing but the sounds of the wind rustling the leaves and the distant calls of birds. Sarah looked out over the fields, her thoughts drifting. She had come here looking for a brief escape, but what she had found was so much more than she had ever imagined. She had found peace. She had found a place where she could be herself, without the constant weight of the world on her shoulders. And most unexpectedly of all, she had found Jake, a man who, in his quiet, unassuming way, had changed everything. Days went by, and Sarah continued to heal, both physically and emotionally. The decision she had been avoiding seemed more complicated than she had initially thought. She knew that leaving the ranch would mean returning to a life that no longer felt right for her, and staying meant embracing something that was still unfamiliar. But every day she spent with Jake, every quiet moment they shared made the decision seem clearer. She realized that she didn't need to rush. She could take her time and allow herself to feel the pull of this new life, this new possibility. One afternoon, after another day spent working alongside Jake, Sarah found herself sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with him once again. The air was warm, the light soft and golden. She could feel the weight of her decision beginning to settle inside her. It wasn't just about staying on the ranch. It was about changing the way she looked at life, about accepting that happiness didn't come from chasing the next goal, but from being present and content with what you had. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm ready to stay." Jake turned to her, his face lighting up with a gentle smile. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice laced with both hope and respect. Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle in her chest. "I am. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that for right now, this is where I belong." Jake reached out and took her hand, the warmth of his touch sending a ripple of connection through her. "I'm glad," he said simply, "because I think you found a home here, and I'd like nothing more than to share it with you." In that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. Sarah didn't need to have everything figured out. She didn't need to know the exact path her life would take. But for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with the choices she had made. There was no rush. She didn't have to live by anyone else's rules or expectations. She could live on her own terms, and that was enough. As the sun sank lower, casting a soft amber glow over the ranch, Sarah leaned back in her chair, the cool evening breeze brushing against her skin. She looked over at Jake, her heart full of gratitude, and realized that everything she had been searching for had been here all along. It wasn't just the ranch that had changed her. It was the quiet moments, the bond they had formed, and the simple beauty of a life lived slowly and peacefully. This was her new beginning, and it was exactly where she needed to be, with Jake on the ranch, surrounded by the vastness of the land she had come to love. Together they would find their own path forward, one step at a time.